Time for another episode of the Cold Star Project. This one's a little bit different. I have Ken Cesar here, who has been a guest before. If you missed that episode, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it, because Ken is, he's under 30 and he created $2 million businesses, 2 7-figure businesses, and I'm incredibly jealous. And the price he paid for it was extreme focus, dedication, and persistence, which is missing out there in the real world. And he approached me, he said, Jason, we haven't talked for a while. Let's catch up. And then while we were talking, he said, why don't we have an informal conversation about some of the stuff that we see in the online marketing world and how awful it is, because we share opinions on this and they go really against the grain. And I think if you have seen that internet marketing world, and both of him and I have been, we met in that world. We've both been around in it for a long time, me since around 2010, 2011. And then I think we ran into each other on a forum, and he was a client for a little while. And like after 2015, then we both started focusing on like, okay, how do I build a real business here? For my own situation, I came from that corporate world. I had a 15-year corporate history as an executive before moving to the United States. And I had a couple jobs, corporate jobs after that, but then I got into the online marketing world, and it messes with your head. And I think that Ken and I are going to really focus on that today, about how that world messes with your head, especially if you're a Facebook-based marketer. It's a little different through LinkedIn, although we see that bleeding over there from Facebook to LinkedIn as those marketers try to shift and move up ticket in that. But I think we're going to have a great informal conversation. There isn't going to be a question and answer thing that I normally have as a format. I think we're just going to chit chat, and hopefully you'll be able to pick up some pretty cool contrarian point of view ideas. So Ken, thanks for being here.
Yeah, awesome.
All right. So let's dive right into it. What the hell is wrong with that internet marketing model where you're told, oh, hey, Ken, you're working at some company, just quit, okay? Just try and like make a business maybe part-time that replaces that income, and maybe you get to $10,000 a month, which is pretty high for the average regular person out there. They'd be pretty delighted with that. What's wrong with that?
So I think, even just based on what we were talking about prior to actually recording the call here, the biggest thing that I've noticed, and I think we're all kind of guilty of this. I know you and I just expressed that we both probably did this for much longer than we would have wanted to, but is you're kind of chasing that dangling carrot of like, get out of this job or make, more than a livable income, whether that's $8,000 a month, $10,000 a month, whatever it is. The magic number you always kind of see tossed out there is like, $10,000 a month. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think what happens is it's almost like you're just going after the first thing that can get you to that point. And then you can kind of pat yourself on the back when you go, oh, I reached that point and I'm successful now. But $10,000 a month is so little. And these numbers that are thrown out there, you never obviously get the full story, right? So $10,000 a month, maybe you're looking at like 20% net. That's like a fry cook income, right? Right. But you're bringing in high revenues, or what most people would conceive to be high revenues, without really getting the full story. So I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. And then obviously, as I just touched on as well, when you're going through and actually planning out a company, you have to really understand what it takes to get to $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, because I guarantee you, once you hit that $10,000 per month mark, you're going to want to move up from there. You're going to realize like that means absolutely nothing in the big picture. And you're going to realize, based on, whatever you're doing, to scale from $10,000 a month to $100,000 a month requires a completely different business model, a completely different plan of action and strategy. You're going to probably need much more margin than you originally thought. You're going to need to be able to allocate that extra margin to operational expenses, offices, employees, all kinds of stuff, right? So that carrot, or that magic number, if you undercut what the real potential is. And the real potential is 1 million, 5 million, 10 million. And you're planning for that 10,000 per month mark. It's just not going to work out. And I think what you probably find, or a lot of people probably find, is they get to that point and they're like, oh, this isn't going to work. Like I need to restructure and rebuild an entire company. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with like having to take a step back or whatever, kind of reassess things. But obviously you would probably want to try and get it right from the start. I don't know if you'd agree with it.
I certainly would, because I've been the guy who was trapped in that internet marketing mentality for years, for probably five, 6 years.
Right.
You know, and again, I had the executive corporate role experience before that. And yet you get into this situation where, ooh, this is fun and I'm making money and I understand it, and it gets into a comfort zone, and then you're stuck. And then you have this fear of, oh, I don't want to change anything because then I'm going to give up what I've already got. And that's scary, right? I don't want to go back to zero. I remember how hard it was building that $10,000 a month business, whatever, where you cap out, right? And yeah, the idea that the margin, understanding like there is a cost of traffic, there's a cost of conversion. Even if it's just you getting on sales calls and doing sales calls, there's a cost to that. You require so many hours of time to go get a customer or client. And a lot of people I talk to before we go through their business model plan discussion with them, who are in that coaching situation or that agency situation, they don't understand that they are burning through money in order to get to that customer and drive that revenue. And it's subtracting. There is an amount there, even if it's just you are not free. And so you end up with far less money at the end. And then you get that money tolerance trap. If you've heard me before talk about this, it's like a thermometer about how much is a lot of money for you. I know my money tolerance went way down because I got trapped into thinking about what is this, right? What is normal for me? And if you're running a small agency, the IT firm back in Vancouver before I left, say in around 2008, that era is what comes to mind. We had to make $60,000 a month just to break even. And if you get used to making $10,000 a month and $2,000 in margin, you're never going to get to 60,000. You're not going to have the spare brain cells to figure it out, the capacity, because you're going to go, well, I can only do these few action things. And you're not freed up to imagine, okay, what do I have to do to go make $120,000 this month so I can pay for those people that I'm going to need to do fulfillment with, and then have some money left over after my new cost of traffic and my new cost of conversion and my new cost of fulfillment, and that to make a profit here. So yeah, getting that right mindset off the bat and not getting trapped and sucked into that horrible low money tolerance, low budget mentality is so critical. Ken,
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you got into two businesses. The first one was an agency business, which you built up to 7 figures, and then you were like, this is crazy. There was something wrong with that model, and then you moved into e-commerce, and now you're in a different situation with that.
Right. So it's those are two obviously very different businesses and business models. You know, it's interesting because with you just touched on a lot of stuff there that I guess we can dive deeper into, but I think I should probably start out by saying, like, people really need to come into this like business stuff. And I have a pretty good idea of who your audience is. But I think just in general, like, understanding truly what is doable and truly like what numbers really equate to in terms of profit and versus revenue and gross margin in that, because it's very easy to look at this stuff and see somebody on YouTube that's claiming that they did 20 million or 10 million or 1 million in sales this year. But what does that actually work out to be? And the story's very, very different once you open the back end of the business and see how much money is actually in a bank account, right? So I've been reading a lot into like the actual financials of a company. What does a healthy company look like in terms of the financials? What does a really healthy company look like in comparison to other businesses in its market or in its space? And this is kind of like a boring topic, right? Super boring. It doesn't get clicks. It doesn't get views. I'm sure everybody listening to this just tuned out when I said that, but it is really important to understand this stuff because it's the actual fundamentals of running a business and actually getting cash into a bank account. So when you're going through this, you need to like, and I should probably relate this just to like a lot of the financials I've been learning about it, and just like even people that I know that run legit companies that have given me kind of the same information. I've kind of sourced from different books, different training courses, and then obviously people that are successful as well. And a lot of them will say like almost the healthiest profit margin you're going to get out of a legitimate company is probably somewhere in like that 15 to 20% range. That's like about as good as large. And when I say larger companies, they're still small businesses, but I'm meaning like multi-million-dollar companies. That's what they're grossing in revenue, right? So when you're looking at this stuff, you need to understand, like, if somebody says they're doing 2 million in sales, right? What does that actually equate to in terms of like pre-tax net profit? That's going to be, you know, if we follow that guideline, that's going to be like 400 grand maybe at the max peak, right? In terms of like what they net, which is still obviously an amazing income. It's a far cry from $2 million though, right? And then in my type of business, and this is, you know, you touched on this before. Previously, I was running an agency where it's basically just all cash in, all cash out, right? So you're not buying up inventory, storing inventory. It's pretty simple in terms of the numbers, right? Like somebody gives you a paycheck on the first of every month. You're paying employees to operate their services, go out, do the work, and then your obviously margin is what's left over in between those two numbers. It's about as basic as it gets, and it's cash in and cash out. With the inventory-based business, it's much different, much different. So it's much more complicated in that you're buying up inventory, releasing new products, redesigning products, and putting them out there into the marketplace, but you're holding on to that inventory. And that's a big expense on the business, right? So if you are holding inventory in a warehouse, you're essentially sitting on cash that's not being used up if that product isn't selling. And that's how a lot of companies can outgrow their cash and literally go out of business if they're not careful. Like meaning your company's so successful and growing so fast that you go bankrupt because you're buying up more inventory and sitting on it. And I can get into all the issues that we're facing right now with like the coronavirus and all this stuff that's going on because some of our suppliers are in China at the moment. But it really complicates things. So I'm trying to equate this back to somebody who's listening to this, who's maybe caught up in the pipe dream of like, oh, $1 million company. I saw this guy on YouTube. He showed a screenshot with $1 million in sales. That's not the full story, obviously. What they need to understand is probably that guy's making maybe 15% net margin. So on $1 million, and it's also important to understand when somebody shows you a screenshot of 100 grand a month, let's just assume that that's not photoshopped or faked, right? Which is probably in this day and age, a pretty big assumption, but let's assume that that's a real shot of 100 grand a month. That doesn't mean that they were doing 100 grand a month over and over and over and over. That's like one single month. And a lot of times you'll notice those months are from like November, December when retail sales are very high, maybe double what it usually is. So again, you're not getting that full story, but that person isn't showing you how much inventory they then had to repurchase. That person isn't showing you how much cash is actually going into their bank account. Right. So it's a huge difference between one of the biggest metrics that we try and shoot for to be successful now is we want more profit margin than our competitors, but we also want to hang on to more cash meaning our products have to be more expensive than our competitors. And then at the same time, we also have to hold on to less inventory, hold on to less operational expenses. So we have more cash sitting in a bank account than that we can freely operate with. And that took a very, very long time to understand.
Yeah, and it's true that high performing companies tend to have larger cash reserves by many
Right.
times than
Yeah.
their less successful competitors. I'm also thinking about like a restaurant. It is possible to sell yourself into oblivion, and people will go, "How can you do that? You made $2 million." Well, let's consider at Cold Star, we see inside a lot of other businesses. And so I know it's not just one or two, right? But let's say we've got a restaurant that is popular and they have not done costing very well. They don't really know what it costs to put out a plate of food. And let's say they're charging $12 for this plate of food, but the actual cost with labor and material and overhead and that is maybe $15 or $16. And so every plate that they're selling is putting them $3, let's say, into the
Right.
hole. And
Yeah.
so you can sell yourself into oblivion. And I guess it's no different with e-commerce, because you have a carrying cost of inventory that you mentioned. You've
Right.
got import requirements, you've got lead times to worry about, and you've got a timing problem too, particularly because you've got so much seasonality in that business, right? And it's not solely a factor of e-commerce seasonality. It's in tons and tons of businesses.
Right. So with the seasonality is a good point. Our brand, or like the industry I'm in, isn't necessarily very seasonal. Like the sales are pretty steady year round. The difference in seasonal being is just that during November, December, January,
Yeah.
sales can be anywhere from like 1.5 to 2.5 to sometimes 3x regular sales. So you have to time that and make sure you have cash reserves for that. But yeah, so touching on that point with the restaurant and the dinner. So let's say, even if they are making a healthy margin, right? So let's say they sell a plate for $20.
Yeah.
Their expenses on all of that are 16, right? So left with $4 net margin, right? What people aren't factoring is that $4 doesn't go into their bank account. That $4 now goes into buying more ingredients, stocking up their kitchen again. So it's like, how much cash is left over after you're restocking everything. That's where things get really tricky with e-commerce stuff. And it took me a super long time to understand that, but that's where you understand like the discipline of operating a company. And if you operate a company with extreme discipline, and like you said, the two massive indicators of like how successful a company is going to be is like, and this is just in terms of operations, is can they hold on to more cash and do they have more margin? Because if you can do those two things, it really, I mean, you're not guaranteed to win ever, but it gives you a much bigger advantage over your competitors who are now stuck with, we see this all the time, especially with like Chinese companies that are selling. They're going to undercut everyone's pricing. So let's take Amazon, for example. If you sell on Amazon, you can try to build a brand on there around a specific type of model or product and sell it as like more of a premium high end. We can use any example, but let's use, say, what would be a good example? We can use like luxury knives. So like that a professional chef or kitchen would use, versus a Chinese company may come in and just sell a knife that's about as basic as it gets, and they want to bring in more sales. So somebody from the outside, there's all types of softwares and data that you can look at now to see what's called like a bestseller rank on Amazon, to see who's selling more. Obviously, that doesn't give you, again, the full story. All that basically tells you is the data in terms of how much one seller is selling versus how much another seller is selling their item for, right? But what I try and look at now, especially with our competitors, is like they may sell more actual units of a product, right? And their revenues may even be higher because they're selling more, but their margin is probably like half of ours. And I know at that point that they've kind of just pigeonholed themselves onto like just being an Amazon seller at that point, right? So there's no room for them to expand a product line. There's no room for them to expand outside of Amazon. Whereas what we're trying to do is get more margin. And we are probably one of the highest revenue companies in our space. We are probably the highest margin, if not one of the highest margin companies, meaning we've tried to position ourselves as like a premium brand. And now what it comes down to for me is like, I want to run the company in a very disciplined way, in that we're not overholding on our stock. So we can hang on to more cash reserves. What you'll find a lot of times in today's day and age is, and again, this becomes an issue when you have everybody on YouTube or every course seller is basically selling the same thing of like, what you got to do is copy this person's product. You can undercut their pricing and you can still make $5 or $10 per sale and do well that way. They have no intention of understanding, like, here's how much margin we need to survive. Here's how much margin we need to actually grow this into a legitimate brand, right? So what we're trying to do is find, like, listen, if we can, make an 18% net margin and all of our competitors are doing like 7%, we can now take 4% of that margin and put it into, for example, video and content and building a brand outside of these different online channels. You can even start doing wholesales or trade shows or whatever it may be. And ultimately, the company this is my belief anyways, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this, but the company that builds a brand now is ultimately who's going to win. I think we're past the days of acquiring customers like the 2013, 14 Facebook ad days where you could just put an ad out and make profit margin. I think those days are gone now, and you have to focus on building a brand. That's what's actually valuable. How many Google searches does your brand name get? That's what's important in selling a lot of this stuff. I think it goes far beyond just the numbers now. And I think brand is super important these days.
Well, I'll agree. A brand it will really reduce your cost of customer acquisition as you go along, right? And so what I've heard you say is like, look, we need to begin with the end in mind. People say they know that, but they don't really, because look at what they do. They rush out and try and make a $10,000 a month business, right? And then they find themselves capped there and going, oh, I'm afraid to give up this in order to grow bigger. And then they have a problem. So is it scalable? Well, is your idea scalable? What's an indicator, right? And an indicator that you have brought up is, can you keep or retain more cash as you grow? And if you can't, because you're continually burning it back into inventory because your margins are so low, you're screwed. You can't grow.
Or you're over purchasing inventory, meaning like you're holding on to one mistake a lot of companies will make is in the early days, they're trying to make as much margin as possible. So if I buy a set of knives for a month's worth or 2 months worth of those knives, I'm going to get a certain price. If I buy a set of knives for a 6-month inventory hold or 12 months, I'm going to get a much more reduced price because we're buying in bulk, for example, right? So it's basic economics. But the problem with that is you think you're saving on margin, which you are, but you're actually burning up all your cash because now your cash is stuck into this one reserve of this one product.
Right. It can't go and develop a new distribution channel for you.
Right. And you can't go do it and release new products. And more importantly, what happens when a Chinese competitor comes in and puts out the exact same set of knives and undercuts you for $10, right? Now for them, they don't care because they don't have the same strategy as you. They just want to sell through as many knives as possible versus you want to put out a set of knives for this price. And when a Chinese competitor comes in and releases the same type of thing, you want to be able to upgrade yours or clearly identify why yours are better or why yours are different. A lot of this stuff has just become a lot more complicated because the floodgates are kind of open now, right? And I think one thing we've seen is previously your biggest competitors would have been like a mom and pop type of situation where they had an extra, let's say, maybe $10,000 that they were willing to invest into like e-commerce, and they just bought a course and they're super excited to release a few products with this $10,000. The difference now is that $10,000 doesn't take you anywhere near as far as it did like 4 or 5 years ago, right? So it's almost like a pay to play situation where you have to have money now in order to, and this is stuff that people really need to understand. Again, this probably touches more on like people that are maybe just interested in this topic or want to get started. But if you come into business like cash strapped, you don't have enough money to, and you don't understand how much money it takes to really get something off the ground, and you just purchased a course, or you heard some guy telling you, oh no, you only need $1,000 to get started. It's like, it would almost be impossible to make that work.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, say you have that $10,000. If we were to go back to 2014, so advanced targeting had come out for Facebook. I know because I lost a lot of money in 2013 when it wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And compared to today, your cost of acquiring a customer, your cost per lead is way higher today than it was. So your $10,000 goes far less. Whereas if you have a brand and you're working towards getting people on board with that brand, I mean, Apple does not have to worry about that, right? They're not worrying about marketing and copywriting and all those conversion tools, which again, I know a hell of a lot about those things, but they just don't matter as much as they did a few years ago.
Right. Apple's actually a really perfect example of what I'm talking about. Apple owns a very small percentage of the smartphone market. I think Samsung is the biggest phone provider in terms of like, there's literally more Samsung handheld devices out there than there is Apple. The difference is Apple owns a majority of the profits in that space. So again, they're selling for less. They're selling less actual products, right? Yeah. But their profit margin is much greater than their competitors. And it's why Apple's, I mean, this stat's been thrown out there a lot, many times, but they're sitting on so much cash. It's insane, right? And that's why they're like primed to crush the space and continue to crush it, because they've operated a company in a way that is much different than what other people are doing. And I think that's really where there's room these days to actually get ahead and do well, is like taking a different approach. You're not going to take on Procter & Gamble and outsell them in toothbrushes and toothpaste, right? Yeah. You have to create a product that's much more needed in that market space that allows you to make more profit. And you can play the profit game, sell it for more, make more money, create a brand that speaks to an end customer more. Why do people buy Crest? It's like people buy Crest because they've always bought Crest, because it's an option. That brand doesn't speak to anybody, right? If you can create, and this is similar along the lines of like, what's the difference between Gillette and Dollar Shave Club? Like Dollar Shave Club was a much more personalized brand that literally, I was reading this case study on Harvard Business Review about how much profit Dollar Shave Club was eating into from these major players, because Gillette was using this old distribution system and they didn't have a brand that spoke to anyone. It's like, we sell these blades for X amount. Mind you, Gillette may have even sold the actual blades for for more than Dollar Shave Club, I think. But Dollar Shave Club was able to create a brand where it was like, they differentiated the product. They got people on a subscription-based model, so their average customer value is probably worth more, and they were able to demand a huge percentage of that market just by doing things much differently. And that's really the only way you're going to like survive now. You see these different companies that are out there that are, I mean, my God, every person I know is like trying to start a coffee company or something like that, or like a fitness brand, it's like you miss the, for sure. The fitness one is out of control, dude. Yeah. That shit is out of control. Like, you cannot go out there and just copy and replicate what other people are doing, which is literally what's being taught or sold. I think the people that are going to have the biggest advantage now are people that understand a market really well, really well. They understand like what's missing in that market space. What do people need? What do people want? And how do we create a moat around that? Meaning, if you know an industry super well, let's say like, let's use like the fitness industry, like protein, for example. There's a lot of different protein supplements, and people are even starting to release protein like cooking stuff now, or the gluten-free stuff, right? If you can come in there and create a product that's needed, that people really want, that hasn't been done before, but still kind of falls in line with like that fitness stuff, then you can be successful and do well. But if you can't come up with something like an interesting one is the cauliflower based cooking materials, right? So like people are using cauliflower based crust for their pizza. So make of that what you will. Some people hate it. Some people love it. There's a huge market out there for that. And somebody went in and exploited that and is making a lot of money out there now because they realize that there's huge potential. Now, they're not going to beat whoever the main pizza crust company is. Like, it's just not possible at this point. But they are going to be able to demand a huge percentage of like that healthy market that wants to eat pizza. And if you're not thinking like that and you're just going out and copying and replicating something that you see, you're guaranteed to lose, especially if you're underfunded. If you're coming in with like $2,000 and you can't afford to design something that's different or better, right. It's just like a recipe for disaster. And it's why I've really been big now on the idea of product. And I think I told you this, like, I feel like marketing has almost never been less valuable than it is right now. And I think that's because everybody's out there just shouting and screaming about what they have, and nobody really has anything different. As soon as something different does come, it's like you need way less marketing dollars to effectively explain why it's different and why people need it. It should just naturally fill a gap. And then you can go in there and really make a run and explode your business. But just the idea of like, oh, we came up with better copy than this guy, that may increase conversions like 1% or 2%. That's not going to be a game changer in the overall big picture of your business.
Okay. So the fitness folks, the personal trainers and that, for years, I've directed them over to Justin Devonshire, who you can find on Facebook and LinkedIn. And the thing that I love about him is he gets operations, he gets processes and systems and cash flow and that, and he's perfect. I don't work with personal trainers and that, so it's not a good fit for me, but he's the guy who I know knows his stuff in that area. Apple has created a brand, and they don't really need to do a whole lot of marketing. Like they spend lots of money on it, but it's about an impression. It's not about features usually. And they don't have to go out and get a customer from scratch. They've already got one. But for somebody who says, well, okay, and we'll go back to the Dollar Shave example. I don't have 20 years to develop a brand, Ken, right, Jason? What do I do here to develop a word that you mentioned that I think is we haven't emphasized enough in marketing, and we need to start doing it, the moat. How do I develop a moat and not have it take 20 years and $1 million in order to create that brand?
I mean, I think moat is ultimately
what is it? Let's define it.
Right. So it comes down to a lot of different things. It's like, I think the term was coined by like Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett, and I don't know that for sure, but that's just the common thing I hear them reference is like they would not buy up a business or invest in a business unless it naturally has moat associated with it. So moat meaning there's almost like an organic or I guess even a lot of people would do it strategically, but most people, almost everybody would do it strategically, but you're essentially building up like a barrier around your business so that other people can't just come in and replicate it overnight or very easily, right? So moat could be intellectual property, it could be patents, it could be trademarks, it could be a brand and the way you tell your story and how that resonates with a customer. And that's why they are willing to pay more for your product than they are for another company's product. And then obviously, like, I think the biggest one would be like the product design or what makes that product unique or special over other competitors. So moat specifically for what we're trying to do to create moat, there's a few different things, right? So number one, we're trying to create a different brand and community. And again, this ties back into how we operate the company. So if we can operate with more margin than our competitors and we have more cash, we're going to be able to build that brand out and tell our story better. And that's going to be a huge advantage for us, right? Now, this works for us because our products are differentiated and we do things differently in the way that we try and build stuff out. We're always getting ripped off. So I feel like we're one of the forefront leaders in terms of like the products we're putting out and the way that they're designed. And I look at our competitors, and one thing I'm big on is I'm looking at currently how many brand searches our company gets versus other companies. And it's like through the roof in terms of like how many monthly searches we get. And our nearest competitor is probably like 1/10 or maybe 10% or less of what we get, right? So that right there is like a natural type of moat where people are looking specifically to buy our products. If you try to advertise for our brand name or our keyword within Amazon or within Google or these different search engines, you're going to pay a lot of money, right? Like our brand name commands a lot of money in terms of the pay-per-click, and we're going to be naturally selected as like the main company that gets the top ads because it's what's most relevant for what a customer is looking for. So the pay-per-click engine that we're paying is always going to put our ads at the top. So that's a huge moat advantage, right? And again, that ties into both the product design and it ties into like the brand and the story that we tell and how we differentiate ourselves and express that to the customer. Again, when we have more margin, we're able to do that at a higher level and at bigger scale, and that creates more moat, and more people are searching for us. So I think that's probably a big one that people would look at. Obviously, intellectual property is another one. That's a route we've tried to explore, and it just didn't work out. So we've got patents on certain products. The patent and lawyer game is very tricky, and I've just found it's not worth the time or energy invested into it. It just didn't work out for us. I mean, we could go out there and sue these people. The problem is when you start suing people, you're paying a lot of money for lawyers, and then you're suing a company, which again, probably doesn't have a lot of cash. You're probably going after a mom and pop type of customer customer type of business that paid for advice for some course that said to rip off this product. They didn't do the research. And now you're going to sue somebody who has no money to give you anyways. The money's just going to a lawyer and everybody loses. And that's like this. We've explored that option, and that seemed to be the case every single time. It's like, you're just going to be spending money, wasting a lot of time on this, and you're not really going to get anything back. So the other one would be, if you can basically come up with like a really solid business model, meaning like a subscription type of based business model, that was huge moat for the Dollar Shave Club company, right? Like that was kind of their moat, was they came up with a business model that no one else had come out with, a recurring type of subscription where people really loved the brand. Again, they loved the story that the brand told, that they were willing to pay them on a monthly basis every single month to receive these types of products and packages. So there's a lot of different ways that you can come up with this stuff and separate yourself and differentiate yourself. But you can kind of see that all of them pretty much require cash, right? All of them require a good amount of money for you to really separate yourself. Now take that approach versus what most people are doing. Let's drop ship products from AliExpress and pay, and hopefully the Facebook ads work out where we're making enough margin and we can do this long enough until somebody catches on to what we're doing, and then they just rip off and replicate what we're doing, and then we find the next product. It's like there's zero leverage to that. You're just hopping from product to product to product, probably burning through more cash as you test this stuff out than you're actually making in the long run, because you have to keep jumping ship until you can find something that works. I don't understand how people can make that work. For the life of me, I just can't.
So part of a moat then is developing some institutional knowledge, some expertise.
That's huge.
And as you're hopping around, how are you going to, you don't learn anything that you can repeatedly apply over and over again.
Right. and you're not building up, like if you're selling spatulas and then all of a sudden you're selling backpacks and then all of a sudden you're selling fidget spinners or whatever the latest hot thing
Where's
is.
the
It's like,
brand?
where's the brand?
Right.
You're developing all these different customer email lists and all these different markets. Like it's a complete mess in terms of what you're doing, and there's no strategy behind it. Again, this just ties back into what's the quickest way I can make 10 grand a month and exploit that for as much as I can. And it's probably not going to work out well. Like it's really common sense too. Like if somebody's truly making $1 million a year drop shipping, why are they telling you what they're doing? And I know this, it's almost like cliche how many times this gets brought up, but it's true. It's like, if a guy's really making that much money, you think he cares about teaching his students about doing the same thing? It's like, no, he's going to be doing that running a company. Like imagine Richard Branson opened up a course on how to sell or how to run an airline. Like he wouldn't, because he runs a successful airline. He doesn't care about teaching his students about that. Like it doesn't add up at all. There are guys that I've seen that are in this space that are very legit and have done like courses or seminars, but they proudly like put their brand and product out there. It's like, this is what I do. This is what I sell. If you're a course seller and you don't give out information on your company because you're scared someone's going to replicate it, you don't have a company. And that's what everybody's doing. Right. If it's that easy to take your company down in terms of like somebody can just go out there and find the products you sell and then get Facebook ad information and data to replicate that, you don't have a business. Like your business is going to fall apart, which is why you're selling courses, because you're like, this could end at any moment. I need another source of revenue quickly.
Yeah, and that's a frustrating situation to be in and keep returning to. And I'm wondering how many listeners are going, wow, I have been that guy. I have struggled to make the $10,000 a month through the copying other people's business model that is not scalable, doesn't develop a moat. You get no expertise, and then you're exhausted. That's the other thing too, right? Maybe you get there. Maybe you hit that low money target and you're happy with yourself, but you're so tired, you're not going to have any creativity and figure out what to do next.
Right. Yeah.
How can people figure out a strategy then, Ken, from your perspective?
So this is going to be unpopular opinion, but I truly feel like most people just shouldn't be in business. And if they are going to be in business, they should be in it with a partner. Looking back, I probably would have partnered with someone, because these days, like I just look for how can I get as much leverage out of my time and energy spent as possible. And there's certain things I'm good at. There's certain things I'm not good at that have taken me much longer to learn about. If I'd partnered with somebody who was able to put up cash, to have skin in the game as well, meaning like, you know, they put their own money down and bought into a business as well. They need to make this succeed just as much as I do. It's very powerful if you have two people that can complement each other. So that's probably the first place that I would look, is like, what are you good at? What skills you have? What industry knowledge do you have? And how can you explore and make that, turn that into a legitimate company where there's a need for a product in that space. That's where you're probably going to find the most success that you can actually have. And again, if I were to go back and do this stuff over, I think my skill set is finding white spaces in a market, getting to understand and know that market pretty well, and then putting out products and designing products and marketing those products. The back end stuff of this is like taxes, operations, hiring people, standard operating procedures, which I know you talk about all the time. All of these different things, like the front end stuff of what people see is probably what I'm good at, where they look at a business and go, oh, this is cool. They have this line of product, this and that. The back end stuff is probably what my weakness is, like the hiring stuff, as I mentioned, bringing people on board, trying to find the right pieces to put in place to scale and make this leverageable. All of that stuff is very difficult to do everything at the same time. So if you're running a growing business, now all of a sudden you have to handle the marketing, putting out the product, all of this stuff at the same time as, taxes need to be done. You need your bookkeeper to finish this stuff on time. You need to manage and operate the cash and the accounting and the financials. It can become extremely overwhelming. And this is something I'm just kind of thinking about now, is like, this would probably be the last company that I ever start where I didn't have a partner.
Starting alone.
I
don't know. It's got its ups and downs. I've been there. I've had that partner. And they can be up when you're down and vice versa, which is extremely helpful, actually, because there's always one emotionally willing to pull up the other.
And I think that's a good thing, though. Like, if there's somebody, obviously the main thing that comes to mind is like people are fighting internally over like what they think is the best decision for the company. But that's probably healthy if you think about it. Like, if there's two people that have opposing opinions, it's like, okay, let's hash this out and actually see who's right. There is going to be fights or whatever. But I think if the worst case scenario is obviously like somebody steals money out of the business, or that's worst case scenario. But
it is a marriage. It is a marriage, and tied into the bank accounts together and all the corporate paperwork. And when you leave, or one of you leaves, this needs to be figured out at the beginning. And I know
exactly. It has to be.
The closing engine that I had with Jeremy Pope, we had all that stuff figured out from day one, and we spent a ton of time meeting and talking to each other, because he approached me with this idea. That, hey, do you want to work together on it? We met for hours. Just talking about everything under the sun, politics, science, religion, etc. To find out, can we get along, or are we going to?
Exactly. And you find out who somebody is, and like, I don't know. There's certain things that are like little telltale signs that you should not be, not only in business with someone, but it's like, get this guy away from me.
Let's hear about some of them from your point of view.
I mean, I think if somebody is like lies, like just minor about little things, that's always a massive red flag. Or if they just treat, like if you're out at dinner or something or whatever, and they're just kind of sneaky about the way they treat somebody, or they're talking about somebody behind their back, it's like, that's in their mind, they're thinking, I would never do this to you because you're my friend, or like, I would never screw you over or talk about you in that way because you're my friend, right? But I think it's very easy to change the definition of what a friend is pretty quickly, right? So a lot of that stuff you really need to watch. Just like small little character traits is probably what I would look out for. Again, I'm not the best at this because I don't have a business partner, but it is stuff that I have to look out for when I'm hiring people or bringing on employees or whatnot. That is very important, that even if you bring somebody into a company to work for you, I think that you want them to have shared or common values in terms of, like, we brought somebody on last year and he lasted like a week. He was like talking down to everybody. What he was talking about wasn't even making sense. It was way too complicated. But instead of like understanding that, hey, a business should be simplified in terms of the processes and how things are done, he wanted to be smarter than everyone and overcomplicate it. And then when they didn't understand, he would talk down to them. It was just like a nightmare scenario. And we're like, dude, this is not going to work out. And then obviously, as you go through and make the next hire, you're like, okay, let's avoid that type of that type of situation.
Right. I am terrified when I go on like forums, business forums and things like that, and I'll see people, or social media even, going, I'm looking for a co-founder. Can somebody help me find a co-founder? I'm like, oh my gosh, you are rushing into marriage without knowing anything about this person.
Right.
And what are their expectations, and what, like, just bringing a skill set is not enough.
Right. There's a lot of stuff you really have to look out for. And again, I think it's funny, like, I'm interested to hear your perspective on this, on like the hustle culture, like the idea of like, and I mean, this stuff is probably now at its all-time high in terms of everybody is like trying to be a Gary Vaynerchuk.
Right.
There's all these little Gary Vaynerchuk spawns out there. Dude, there's so many like 50-year-old guys wearing hoodies on stage and swearing in that now. And you're just like, we don't need any more of that guy. Like, there's one of them that we needed. And I'm starting to change my thoughts on Gary Vaynerchuk pretty quickly. But like that's already been done. And now everybody just kind of replicating and saying the same thing. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the idea of like hustle culture.
Yeah. Well, I'm against it. I think it's stupid.
Right.
And a lot of people may tune out at that, but I'll tell you, I've been around in the online marketing world since 2010, 2011. I ran into these guys when they were new. I've been following Tony Robbins since I was 20 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and it was books and CDs, right? And Gary came on the scene, and he is cool, and he has a great message in that. But you know what? I stopped following him and all those other guys a couple of years ago, 2016 or so.
Probably
2016, 2017.
Yeah.
I just stopped. And there's a key question here, Ken, for me, and that's this: who do you listen to? And you should listen to the person who has what you want, I believe, ultimately. And Gary's cool and all, and he does have, you know, VaynerMedia and all that, but it's not what I want. And
right.
And also I see a disconnect in what Gary says and what he does. And not that he doesn't hustle. Yeah. It's just and some of this is unconscious competence, which is what happens when you get real good at something and you just forget, like, and the curse of knowledge, where you know how to do something, you're good at it, and you forget what it's like not to know that. And you can't go back to knowing what it's like to not know it, right?
Right.
And so he walks around going, well, you should do this, you should do that, in a very general way, because he doesn't really give actionable stuff all that often. But attitude-wise, he's all right, I guess. But he forgets what it's like to be a broke person starting out, I think. And so how can you copy what he does? Because he has resources and attitudes, and, well, you just do it. Like, I'm going to nerd out here and say Q from the Star Trek The Next Generation. He just snaps his fingers and does a thing, right? And you just do it. Well, other people can't just do it. They're not in that situation. So I tune those out. You know that Sam Ovens has really been the only guy who I have consistently watched videos of for the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And he has not said very much that I didn't already know, because I have the operations management education and the business administration degree and all that, right?
Right.
But he deliberately goes and finds things. He's a very good detective and uncoverer of facts. He's a very good assembler of systems and processes, and he gets it. And so I love how you'll produce like a 45-minute or hour-long video, and I'll watch the whole thing, and I'll go, I know that there were tons of people who just couldn't get through the first 5 minutes because they don't have it.
Yeah, and I think he's become much less hypey over the years. I know he used to be kind of like a hypey salesman type of guy, and then obviously I think he's changed a lot of his ways.
Yeah, he started out in that internet marketing world and was like everybody else.
Right.
And then figured out, wait a minute, I need to refine what I'm doing. He built a moat, right? He built one course with one funnel. He talks about that.
Yeah.
He's not trying to be in 60 different places, nor is he selling shoes this week and knives the next.
Right.
One thing. And that's it. And he was,
I think, good at it. One thing that's super important too that a lot of people really overlook is like finding white space and timing a market. Meaning like that's probably the number one indicator, I think, in how successful a business can be, is like, did you time the market correctly? And then obviously with that timing, build moat around what you were doing. Yeah. So like Sam was probably one of the first people to come in and like legitimize selling courses as like not a scumbag guy that's clearly trying to just fleece people out of their money, but actually build a brand around what he's doing, and then come in and operate it properly, and not just do these ridiculous product launches with 1,000 affiliate. Like he was the first person that came in and saw like, oh, there's a white space here to like actually build a legitimate brand and company. Let's leverage this. Like, let's explore this, because everyone's on this like product launch train of like, let's keep making $100,000 every 4 months, and just milk this for all we can. And he's like, no, why can't we do this every single day and actually turn this into a legitimate company.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think that entire industry has pretty much fallen apart. The course seller, and if it hasn't, it's very quickly on its way out. I mean, if you sell, and this is what I've heard because I was working pretty closely with a Facebook ads guy who does work with a lot of these guys, and they're essentially selling a good or a service, whatever you want to call it, a product that has zero cost. Like you're literally just recording a PowerPoint presentation and selling it for the upside on that is insane in how much, quote unquote gross margin there is, if you want to use that term for courses, but they are still losing money because of how much it takes to like acquire a customer now. Like that's how many people have jumped on the bandwagon of I'm going to sell courses and make money this way, which I think pretty clearly tells you where that entire industry. There's no moat. Like you don't need any. You literally don't need anything to get into that industry. Nothing. You need a PowerPoint, Microsoft PowerPoint, and like a microphone and a screen camcorder, whatever. Right. That's all you need.
Well, yes, as the seller of Sales on Fire, I've had a course like that I've been selling for 8 years, and adding to it and whatnot as we go. But and upgrading.
So unfortunately, like if you take somebody who has
no barrier,
if you have a ton of sales experience and you're just not yelling as loud as the next guy's just gonna, because like it's so hard to determine who's legit, who's not. There's so much like stuff out there of just people screaming because everybody has the opportunity to do it now. It's like you want to get into something where there is moat. I mean, I couldn't think of a faster way to sell. Again, we'll use that magic number, 10 grand a month. Just sell 5 courses a month for $2,000 a pop. That's what these guys are doing, right? Yeah. Like that's, and I think that's why it's so inundated with these there's like these young 23-year-old life coaches selling business advice and these courses and that. And you're like, this guy was just duped by the guy that's higher up than him in this pyramid scheme, right? Like it's a coach, like becoming an online coach is the new pyramid scheme. In my opinion, it's like who got in at the top and can sell the most courses on how to coach coaches on coaching coaches, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? So I think that, again, it's a good lesson in terms of if you're looking at an industry or want to get into something, make sure that you have a clear product that needs to be, that's just like there's white space there where, and I think Sam attacked this in terms of, I can't speak to the quality of his products that he put out, but I can speak to the business model that he went after was much different than what everyone else is doing, the way he branded himself. I think just the overall way of how he did things allowed him to create that moat. I don't know how his sales are doing now that there's so many people that are out there. But he had a good little run, and I'm assuming he's still doing all right based on, the stuff I've seen.
Yeah. And just going to his channel and watching the long videos where he publishes his client support calls. And so you get to see like who his clients are and what problems they're having, and so they might be 2 hours or something like that. And I've watched several of those, and the guy knows what he's talking about. So I don't have any problem saying, hey, if you're in that situation, Mark Mawhinney with the Coaching Jungle on Facebook, he's another good guy for that kind of group. And that I got out of Facebook last year, right, where I just pretty much stopped going there. I'll post a few things to have the social media trail if somebody goes searching for Cold Star there or me there. But his group is one that I will occasionally look in. There's like 2 groups, and that's about it. But so he knows, and that coaching coaches thing will come up every so often in his coaching group. Where they'll kind of self-mock. And so,
I mean, it's become like a running joke at this point of like, I remember that was a joke like 4 years ago before, like when we were probably more into this I'm not really into the internet marketing scene anymore. I don't know what's
Mhm.
going on with it, but when I
Right.
was, that was like a joke back then of like, there's coaches out there that are just teaching people how to sell courses, and they're teaching people how to sell courses.
Right.
It's like, where does it stop? If you're at the bottom of that, you're not making any more money because everybody
Mhm.
knows a guy that teaches how to sell courses. You're not doing
Right.
anything different at this point. So I think that whole industry again is probably like starting to collapse on itself. And I started to notice like, there's a guy that I'm not going to say his name, but he's
Mhm.
pretty well known in like the e-commerce space of like
Mhm.
teaching people how to sell on Amazon, sell on Shopify, sell on these different platforms. And he got started around the same time I did. And I think his first month he did like 30,000 in revenue, which is
Yeah.
great. Like your first month in sales, that's amazing. But 2 months later, he was talking about how Amazon and Shopify bought him a Lamborghini and a brand new, like I saw his ads running on Instagram, Snapchat, and all these different sources. And I'm like, dude, what is this? Right? Like you just did 30 grand in revenue a couple months ago. You
Right.
didn't buy a Lamborghini from that. Like, what are you talking?
Right.
It's like,
Well, unless he got into a $5,000 a month lease or something like that. Right.
or he's just joined the dark side of like late night infomercial guy that's
Yeah.
now just advertising on Facebook, right? That's
Mhm.
essentially what this is too, which is hilarious. Like you're just
Right.
you're the 2020 version of like the guy in 1988
Right.
that was
Remember
teaching
that?
people to
Yeah. Yeah.
classify that.
What was it? And there was that one guy. He was an Asian guy. You like diamond, you like pearl. Come to my seminar.
Yeah,
That guy.
yeah.
Oh, up in the Pacific
Like you're the
Northwest, that guy
2020
advertised.
version of that, and somehow like nobody questions what's going on here. It's hilarious. But yeah, so and then he started putting out videos. He didn't know it was my brand, but he started putting out videos showing our website and showing our
Mm-hmm.
products and showing our pages on like how to copy our products. And he's selling this to his students. And I've recently seen now that there's these different YouTube channels, there's these different outlets now that are gaining big followings very quickly. So there's a website called, or a YouTube channel called CoffeeZilla. There's an Instagram page called Baller Busters. And essentially they're just busting these fake gurus. And it's hilarious. Like, just basically putting it out there like, hey, these guys are complete scumbags that are just taking people's money for courses and selling you a dream essentially.
Right.
So how does this like equate to what your listeners think they're listening to? I would just be very careful of like who you listen to. Do not spend your money or information on courses or anything like that. Like essentially you need to be focused on like, what can you do to differentiate yourself? What's like the overall bigger picture rather than like the tactic that these guys are teaching? Because I guarantee you can figure out how to sell on Amazon, right? Like it's not hard to figure out how to become a professional seller, get a professional sales account. That might take you like a week, set up your corporation and all this stuff, right? Like get that stuff. What they're teaching you how to do and charging you $2,000 for, you can literally learn for free. It's not like the tactic of selling on Amazon is not going to do anything. It's like the stuff that matters now is the overall bigger picture, which we talked about before. How do you differentiate a product that's much more in demand and is not currently out there for a specific industry? That's going to skyrocket your sales way quicker than anything they're teaching. In a course, they're going to teach you how to download a software, look at what other people are selling, and then how to rip them off and change, the zipper or change the handle to differentiate your products. Like that's never going to work now.
Right. That's not really differentiation.
No,
That's
it's
not
not
building a moat.
Right. And so are you familiar with the term of like product market fit and like the lean,
of course.
like lean product manufacturing and that? So that's something we've really tried to incorporate now. Is like we have a pretty big community of customers. I think I've told you about this. We have a Facebook community of like a few thousand people that we can now like run ideas by, test product. Like, so it's almost like today's business and marketing world are merging and almost marrying, where like the Y Combinator, Silicon Valley product market fit stuff is now just catching up with the technology of like, oh, you can run Facebook ads and YouTube ads and do these different copywriting techniques. Those two worlds are almost merging now, where it's like you need I guess a foundation in both of them to really have a successful company now. The idea that companies are just at like, I mean, I saw this, there's a course the other day talking about how, did you know that most small businesses don't have a website and don't know how to manage social media? It's like, yes, they do, dude. Every company knows what a website, you're not going to break any barriers, telling a business owner they need to be on Facebook or something, right? Like people know that stuff exists now, but I think they don't, what most people lack is like the understanding of like product market fit, lean manufacturing, how to make sure that a product is validated before you just put it out there, and are people willing to pay? All of this different stuff is super important now.
Right. And people can go do a Google search for Steve Blank and find out all kinds of material about that. Steve Blank is partnered up with Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. The technical engineering advisor for Cold Star, my company, is Dr. Rick Fleeter, and him as a professor at Brown and another professor at Brown are partnered up with Steve Blank to educate their students on his material. And that is all about doing the research to find out your product market fit. So you don't need to buy anything from us. Just go look for that. He's got some great pre-made free courses there with like 2.5-minute videos.
Yeah.
Right? They're really short little snippets.
If somebody's trying to charge you $2,000 for a course on like how to find products, like Jason just said, there's free stuff out there. There's also like very good detailed books for like 10 or $20 on Amazon that would go into way more depth than any course seller would on like how to actually find legitimate products now and what would actually work versus you just copying somebody out of a software or whatever, and you're going to end up broke. Like people want to be told what to do and like this is what you need to do, step ABC, and it's like that's literally the opposite of what makes a business successful.
Yes, because if it was paint by numbers, everyone would be rich.
Exactly.
It's just not.
It's like a lot of creativity, and you need to take risk and chances and actually put cash down. And this also ties into something too that I wanted to talk to you about or ask you about. We touched on a little bit before we started recording here, was like the acquisition model. Like that's certainly something I would look into. I think, again, I just mentioned that like I would probably never start another company with just by myself. I would look for a partner, but even further than that, I would maybe never even start another company. And this is just kind of me thinking out loud because it's an option I haven't explored yet, but rather find a partner and acquire companies where you feel like you can add a ton of value and really exploit, ways to increase the revenue. If it was operated sloppier, they were using proper margins, or there's ways to improve the supply chain that could really improve the bottom line. I think there's huge advantages there. And again, you need cash to do that. Obviously, this isn't something where you're just going to jump in and start a business from scratch and it's going to be successful all of a sudden. You need a lot of money to do that, but there's way more leverage than that. You want to try and look for all the different ways that you can leverage your time, and that's ultimately how you're going to make the most money possible. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that model, like the acquisition model.
To begin with, the first mistake that newbies make is they do not value their time. Their time is the least valuable thing because they feel they have a lot of it. They have 8, 10, 12 hours a day. What else are they doing? And then they walk in and think, oh, it's going to all be about execution, fulfillment of orders and that. No, most of your time is going to be spent on acquiring customers. Right. And the first thing you got to do is figure out the marketing and all that stuff and the positioning and all that. So what the acquisition model allows you to do is bypass all that. You get to that product market fit immediately because you look at companies that have already found it, right? and they're generating a cash flow. So I did not come up with this. The guy who I'm thinking of is Walker Deibel, who has a great book about it. And I interviewed him for this podcast, the Cold Star Project. That episode was recorded in January 2020. It has not come out yet. There is quite a gap. It will probably come out, certainly by May 2020. I'm hoping in April, sometime in there, March or April, it'll come out. And so I had the chance to expand on his book and talk to Walker directly about this acquisition model. One of the most interesting things that's from my point of view anyway, was that in his book, he does not talk much about operations and understanding the operations of the business that you're going to acquire, nor does he talk much about the values. And that's astonishing to me, right? So I asked him about it, and we dug into it a lot. And his short answer was, it doesn't matter as much as you think when you're acquiring a business. So, and he had good reasons for that. And so I would refer us to the podcast with him for that answer. I'll link it up. But he had me convinced. Let's put it that way, as to why. So it was curious, because like that would be one of the first things that I would look for, is that culture matchup, right, between what I want and maybe have going on in my own organization and a thing that I'm going to acquire. But the short answer is there's some reasons why it's open to being acquired. A lot of that stuff was baked in from the beginning. Remember, all businesses, folks, are a outgrowth of the psychological problems of their founders. So there's a lot of stuff in there, baked in from the beginning, that is hard to change. And so maybe as a person looking for businesses to acquire, you will probably filter for stuff that you're comfortable with already, and that'll bypass a lot of that problem. But I love the idea of acquiring businesses, because you are bypassing that horrible phase of finding the product to market fit, right? And they're already generating revenue, and it's a cash flow situation. So if I can do a leveraged buyout, let's say, where I'm paying somebody $10,000 a month or $20,000 a month, maybe with a cash upfront payment as a base payment, which I've borrowed against the assets of the business or the revenue of the business to pay that owner off, and get them out of there. And if I'm making in the margin now, not the revenue, the margin, if I'm making a margin of $15,000 or $20,000 from it after I paid all my bills, that's a deal I will make, right? There is some profit there. So if it costs me less to operate the business and the loan than it does from the margin that I'm getting from having that business, then it starts making financial sense. And I have a base that I can scale on. I've got people in place. I've got expertise. I've got capabilities. I've got marketing and distribution, fulfillment channels, right? All that stuff that is so hard and exhausting to figure out as a new business owner going, I wonder what I'm going to do next year, right? Is already taken care of for you. And you can get to work maximizing what's already going on.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple other levers that can be pulled. Like if you're looking at acquiring a company, essentially from my understanding is, I haven't sold our business yet, obviously, but just in conversations with brokers and people that know the space well, is like essentially a company that wants to acquire you, or an investor that wants to acquire you, is looking at 2 years of financial statements previously, to see that the company's growing, that there's good health in terms of the financials and that. So you could literally acquire a company for a certain amount, and just based off of like the growth of that industry, meaning the industry is growing, more people are getting involved in it, buying products in it, you could go ahead and sell that business a year later or 2 years later and make a very healthy profit on it. If you just learn to leverage certain things, or release a few more products, or as you said, find distribution on other channels.
Isn't that fascinating, right? The rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. And just by existing in that ecosystem for a couple of years.
So that's like one of the main things that we looked for when we were starting, is like, we wanted to make sure that, hey, if there's going to be competition, let's make sure, I know there's going to be competition moving in. It's just the state of the time, the sign of the times. Like you're looking at everybody as you mentioned before, is buying courses or trying to get involved in some type of business now, there is going to be a lot of competition. If you can find an industry that's growing rapidly or growing very quickly, a lot of the times that competition becomes irrelevant because of how quickly a space is growing. So I think that's a super interesting point. And if you can acquire different companies within a certain industry or niche that you know is growing and kind of package them together, I think that can be sold for a ton of money, even if you just held on to it for a year or two, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
it's not the rest of your life, and the added value that you're bringing to the table if you have expertise in breaking open new markets or figuring out that white space that you were talking about. And that could even allow you to pick up a company that is generating a cash flow, but maybe isn't being run profitably.
Right.
Because they're missing some of this stuff. And so you pick it up at a discount, you plug on all the stuff that you're good at, and bingo, you've got yourself a growing, profitable business.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can look at the financials and see like, hey, this can be improved with this type of supply chain, or maybe they're using a different supplier that's more expensive than a supplier that, like if you have specific industry knowledge, it can work out very, very well in your favor. And I think that ties into like, I think a huge point of leverage that we're trying to really focus on is like, if we were to acquire a company, or if we're going to start more brands, I want to keep it within the same industry and same niche, because we already have all the leverage there. We have a community, like a Facebook group, email list. We have social media set up already. We're running ads, and we know what that market wants. We're already starting with like 5x leverage over what everyone else would be starting with if they started a company in this space. It's like, why wouldn't we start in that space? And then again, when you go to sell, if a buyer wants to purchase you and they're purchasing 4 brands that are all grouped together in the same market versus just one brand, that those 4 brands are much more leverage. It's revenue and gross profit that's spread out, which makes the risk on their part much less, right? So they're willing to pay more for it. These are all obviously just different things to consider. I think this is probably maybe a little bit beyond what a beginner should be thinking about, but it is something to think about anyways, because
it's mid-range though. Yeah. For sure with Cold Star, I have full midterm plans to buy up satellite manufacturers as they stumble and screw up because they are not being run as well as they could be. And I will gobble some up and amalgamate them and make a bigger small sat manufacturing company out of it. That's a midterm plan for me, and I don't make any secret out of it.
And how many years away from that do you think you are?
Between 2 and 4.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And again, that's like, there's a moat there. Like, the industry, you know the space, you have connections, you've networked in the space. If you needed leverage or help, I'm sure you could find it pretty quickly. Think about how different that is than, drop shipping shoelaces
by yourself. Yeah. In Pookskeepy. Yeah. So awesome. Well, we've talked for about an hour here, Ken. Let's see how this goes and whether people would like us to do more of these, because there's an infinite amount of monkeys on an infinite amount of typewriters of content that we could talk about. We could dig into this stuff, and we would surface touch some stuff. But thanks a lot for having the idea to do this and keeping on me so that we would get something booked.
Yeah, that was cool, man. I think I hope people get something out of this at least anyways. Like, this is not typical stuff that you would hear, or certainly I haven't on podcasts or any marketing outlet these days. I pretty much
go team, go. Anybody can do it. Make it
right. Like whatever. Hustle, work your face off, do whatever you can to get out of your job. Just go. It's like, what are we doing? Don't worry about it. Just go.
Right. Okay. No, don't go. Think first.
Yeah. Just sell. What are we selling? Doesn't matter.
Right. All right, Ken. Thanks a lot. And I look forward to talking with you and sharing our thoughts again next time.
All right, Jason, for sure.